Pollination, what we said is pollination could broadly be divided into two types, that is self-pollination and cross-pollination, right? So what is pollination? It is the transfer of the pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of the same flower or some other flower, same plant or some other plant, right? As far as the types of pollination is concerned, self and cross, and we have talked about certain factors which enhances self-pollination and which enhances cross-pollination, right? So adult plant or ketia self-pollination hobo, there should be certain criteria depending on that. We have talked about the points, and similarly in case of cross-pollination also, there should be certain factors and only then cross-pollination will take place. Right. We were discussing a point called as self-incompatibility in the last class, right? Self-incompatibility, ami complete kora nai, so that is something that we are going to continue today. What we have said about self-incompatibility, so when we are reading about factors that enhances cross-pollination, tar bhitor etat ki koisilo ami self-incompatibility is a factor. যদি self incompatible hoy, then the plant is obviously meant to go for cross pollination. What is self incompatibility? The failure of the pollen grain or the failure of the pollen tube. Generally we are considered with the failure of the pollen grain, right? Jadi if the pollen grain fails to fuse or fails to fertilize the flower of the same plant, the same flower or different flower of the same plant, তেতিয়াহ'লে তাক আমি কি বুলি কম? Self incompatibility. তাৰমানে কি pollen grain to adult plant আছে, planted pollen grain আছে, pollen grain to same flower to pollinate কৰিব নোৱাৰে, plus it cannot fertilize the any other flower of the same plant. That is his incompetency, and that is what is called as incompatible. Is the definition clear? Because I think last class we have already discussed about this, right? So ekdom simple ke what we will understand je ekedal gosore pollen grain to eketa flower of pollinate koribo nware. Adult gos ase eta flower ase, flower to male sex organ, female sex organ duita ase, কিন্তু male sex organ ot ki থাকিব pollen grains e ki koribo nware ovary to ba egg to fertilize koribo nware, right? Or adult plant ase tat bahut bilak flowers ase, maybe a male flower and a female flower. Male flower could not fertilize with the female flower. That is what is called as incompatible. Who is incompatible? The pollen grain is incompatible, and so we are using the word called as self incompatibility. Clear? Simply ami ki mon rakhim, pollens of the same plant cannot fertilize the flower of the same plant. Clear? So baki khini jot likhisa tare continue kora. Last point আমি কি লিখিছো? Sometimes fertilization occurs, but the embryo degenerates at a very degenerates. Okay, we were talking about embryo, right? So tarpor not point, right? Those 4 points is completed, just paragraph hisabe likha. लिखा just a point. The pollen grains becomes incompatible. Incompatible for what? Incompatible to fertilize the egg of the same flower. The incompatibility reaction of the pollen grain is determined by its own genotype. Means what? Duta word no, eta genotype, eta phenotype. What is genotype? The genetic nature of the pollen grain. So ultimately whether a pollen grain is capable of fertilizing or not depends on what? Depends on the genetic factor of the pollen grain. That is what we understand by the word called as genotype, right? Aru etia jehetu we have already written the complete note about self incompatibility, we will see that from examination point of view question ahise. I think you all remember, as far as the note that we have written, we don't have to remember any word about that note. কৈছিলো no, it is just a diagrammatic based question that is generally asked about it, right? So ki ahe moi hetu dekhai dim, eta diagram akibo laibo ha. So we are talking about the female reproductive part, stigma, style and ovary. Just a way of drawing the diagram. Eblak ekko specific ekko mean nokore. Okay, diagram to akar agote first listen. Yate ami ki akisu female reproductive part of a particular plant, and that plant or that female plant has a genotype ki S1, S2. Whenever we are talking about genes, alleles, eblak to janu, right? A genot ki thake, duta allele thake. So we are talking about the gene because incompatibility factor is dependent on what? Is dependent on the genetic nature of the pollen grain. So if you are talking about the genetic nature of the pollen grain, we have to talk about the genetic nature of the plant also. So why we are denoting it S1, S2? Not necessarily we have to denote it as S1, S2, A1, A2 dibo para. B1, B2 dibo para. It is just a way to name a plant. S1, S2, S1, S2, S1, S2 talks about the same type of a plant. Right? Tinta condition. Edal gos ase, hey gos dalot tinta condition ami explain korim, hey kan tinta diagram akiso. Is the point clear? We are not drawing 3 plants over here. It's just one plant, 3 conditions. Right? Conditions regarding what? Conditions regarding pollination. So in the first diagram, what we see, there is a plant. In the plant or in the stigma, certain types of pollen grains got pollinated and reached the stigma, because that is what is called as pollination. Pollen grains bila kahi pelai kot poribo, stigmat poribo. So in this plant also stigmat ki hoise, pollen grains porise. In this plant, in the second condition also pollen grains porise. Third condition also the pollen grains has come and reached the stigma. Now while we are talking about pollination, I think you all know pollen grains, whenever they get pollinated, it is not always the right type of pollen grain that falls on the stigma. Various types of pollen grains comes and falls on the stigma, and it is the right type that fertilize or that gets germinated on the stigma. I think you'll remember we have talked about the 2-cell condition and the 3-cell condition, right? In majority of the cases, pollination keneke hoy 2-cell condition, right? Tarpsot male gametes form koribo, pollen tube form koribo, all these activities occur in the stigma. So we'll go to that part later. As of now, what we are saying, we are talking about a condition in which we have a plant, and in that plant we have seen certain types of pollen grains coming on the stigma, right? The first condition talks about what? The same plant. And if you talk about this pollen grain, no, pollen grain or genotype ki S1, S2, main plant or genotype ki asle S1, S2. So what we can infer? We can infer that these pollen grains are from the same plant. And what we have read from self-incompatibility, pollen grains of the same plant fail to fertilize. Clear? So, yate jetia pollen grain to yat porile, yate jetia egg to ase, tahator pollen tube form koribo niki, fertilize koribo niki, no kore. So, if you are talking about this one, it cannot happen. It cannot happen. Yes or no? Yes. Understood? Kiba doubts ase jodi khudha. We are taking a plant. Hey, plant to genome structure to keneke denote koriso S1, S2. Pollen grains has also been denoted as S1, S2. What does it say? It says, it tells us that these pollen grains are from the same plant. And we know if you are talking about incompatibility, pollen grains of the same plant fail to fertilize. So since they are same, the plant is the same, they will not fertilize. The pollen tube will not fertilize, it will not grow. The male gametes will ultimately not reach the egg. So a condition to ami ki boli kom totally incompatible. We have total, we have partial, and we have semi-partial. We will be talking about it. So, in this condition what we have seen, the pollen grains has fallen down, but pollination no hole. Clear? Come to the next situation. In the next condition what we have seen is the same plant, right? In the plant this time 2 types of pollen grains has come, one from the same plant, one from the other plant. How do you know that this has come from the other plant? Because the number is different, right? So, in this case what will happen? This one will not go, but this one will enter and ultimately fertilize the egg. Clear? But and in the third diagram, ki hobo so? Duitai hoi jabo, right? So, in this case S3 beleg, S1, S2 plant, S3, S4 pollen grains, edalu germinate koribo, edalu germinate. Etu concept clear hoise nai. So, diagram based question to keneke ahibo, you have to identify, right, which one will germinate and which one will not germinate. So, below this diagram tat likha ইয়াৰ তলত লিখিবা হা This is about the second one. Is it clear? Pollination hobo lagile etatke besi pollen grain nalage because you have one egg, right? If there is one egg, then obviously you need only one male gamete, right? Kintu pollination hole, so pollination hobo pare, many pollen grains can germinate, but it is only one egg that will fertilize with one male gamete, right? The number of male gametes might be more inside, but it is only one that will fuse with one, right? Is this concept clear? What is incompatibility? First, self-incompatibility enhances self-pollination or cross-pollination. It enhances cross-pollination. Second, what is self-incompatibility? Failure of the pollen grain to fertilize the flower or fertilize the same flower or different flowers of the same plant. That is called as self-incompatibility. Why is the pollen grain incompatible, or what is the factor that depends upon is the genetic makeup of the pollen grain. Clear? Next, this diagram talks about what? The 3 conditions, what will happen if different pollen grains falls on the stigma, right? Jedi egita eneke, if S1 germinates, S2 jedi germinates hoy, etu ki hobo? It would be a case of self-pollination. But we are talking about factors that enhances cross-pollination. Self-pollination nohoy karne to cross-pollination hobo. Buji paisa? So, yate jedi etue fertilize kore, etue jedi yat fertilize kore, etu to self-pollination hoy jabo. Ami ki পঢ়ি আছো যে কি কন্ডিশনত সেলফ পলিনেশন নহয়, ক্রস পলিনেশন কিয় হয়? ক্রস পলিনেশন হোৱাৰ এটা ৰিজন কি পোলেন গ্ৰেইনছ ইনকম্প্যাটিবল হয়। ক্লিয়াৰ? আ পোলেন গ্ৰেইনছ ইনকম্প্যাটিবল হোৱাৰ আমি ডায়াগ্ৰামটো দেখাই দিছো। Clear? Now we'll just do one question that has been asked from this part. Is this over? Hold. Diagram hoise? It's the same plant, so it needs to be equal, but doesn't matter. So this is the question, one of the questions that has been asked from this portion. Which one is correct?
D.
Sure? D correct? Baki bilak? Concept to buzi paisa the answer to correct. Konsa? Okay. What does this tells us? S1, S2, S1, S3, right? But S3 is correct, but S1 should have not germinated, so this is wrong. Why it's wrong? Because both of them are germinating. Wrong. Here, S1 is germinating, so it's wrong. It's already given, but S3 is germinating. It already is given negative, so A2 wrong. Germinate. So you have to study the diagram carefully, right? Third, obviously S1, S2, again S3 ki dise. S3 কাটি দিছে এটু হইছে এটু ভুল তো ultimately correct কি S3 so ultimately which one is correct so only this type of a question could be asked from this part diagram দিব diagram to bhalke saba or maybe diagram nidi enekeu di dibo pare if this is also given we can write right In certain books, you will see a little bit higher level from the question from this part. ঠিক আছে normally from NEET point of view, this is the level that we have to study. কিন্তু কিছুমান booksত ইয়াতকে অকমান বেছিকে দিয়ে. In that case, কি দিয়ে যে two plants are given, the male plant and the female plant. Male planter eta genotype দিব, female planter eta genotype দিব. You have to cross it down and talk about the genotype of the embryo and the endosperm. Understood? Did not understand. Adult male plant suppose S1, S2 dile. ঠিক আছে adult female plant ধৰা S3, S4 dile. Embryo কি হ'ব? Genotype. Endosperm কি হ'ব? Genotype. তেনেকুৱা question দিয়ে. পাৰিম নে নোৱাৰিম যদি দিয়ে? এটা তো নাহে. Like it's not going to come because I have never seen such type of a question that is asked generally within this last 3 to 4 years. But even in spite of that, if suppose this is asked, pariba nwariba. Obviously pariba no. S1, S2 ki hoi jabo? S1, S2 divide hoi jabo. S3, S4. S1, S3, S1, S4, S2, S3, S1, S3, S4. Saida combination hobo nohoy. Genetics to korisa no, cross korisa no ami. So S1, S3, S1, S4. S2, S3, S2, S4. So zygote banabole ki lage twice n. So we have the combination. Similarly, if you are talking about endosperm, thrice n. If it is thrice n, then only one n from here, two n from here. Thrice n je hoy, thrice n male or pra keita okol n, female or pra keita duta, right? So you will take twice this and once this. So that will make thrice n combination and you will have the combination of the genotype. Generally, this is a question that's related with the genetics portion, right? But if suppose enuka dhoroner question diye, embryo to jodi ulabole diye, embryo to ami ki jano, this into this it should be twice n, right? Twice n hole iar pora ki hobo? Combination hobo. Combination hola saita combination hobo, tar bhitore konoba eta combination correct hobo. Select the correct answer he dibo, right?
Melor pora duta na jai. Melor pora he duta jai niki.
কিহৰ কাৰণে মেল গ্যামেট দুটা আছিলে কিন্তু দুইটা মেল গ্যামেট সেন্ট্রাল সেলৰ লগত ফিউজ কৰে নেকি এন্ডোস্পার্ম কোনে ফর্ম করে সেন্ট্রাল সেলে ফর্ম করে তো সেন্ট্রাল সেলৰ লকে সেন্ট্রাল সেল অলরেডি ইটস টুৱাইস ইন কারণ সেন্ট্রাল সেলত কি নিউক্লিয়াস থাকে সেকেন্ডারি নিউক্লিয়াস থাকে হোয়াট ইজ সেকেন্ডারি নিউক্লিয়াস টু নিউক্লিয়াই ফিউজ টুগেদার টু ফর্ম আ সেকেন্ডারি নিউক্লিয়াস তো তাতে দুটা আছেই ট্রাইসেন হবলে আৰু এটাহে লাগিব রাইট তো মেল গ্যামেট কেইটা থাকিব এটা রাইট ক্লিয়ার কিবা বুকসত পালে ইফ সাপোজ ইউ গেট certain types of questions just bring it to me else imankhini tough level ot sabo na lage okal etu level loke sam clear so up till here what we have discussed is we have talked about the factors that enhances cross pollination right so what are the factors that enhance cell pollination what are the factors that enhances cross pollination we have discussed the next part of the discussion is agencies for cross pollination because we know whenever we talk about cross pollination mane ki adult plant or unto plant or jabo libo so obviously you need certain types of agencies and what are the agencies it could be air it could be insects it could be water it could be bats etc so heading koriba agencies for cross pollination and this part is total writing there is nothing much to explain khali likhibo lagibo okman basic the note is long as we go on writing the note we'll be marking the important points keneka question ahi se iar pura dise niki okay taku dekhin laibo and I will discuss one day ठीक है let me finish this class today and then I'll say okay देखा agencies for cross pollination it's just a long note keep on writing huh oh sub chapter long even environmental issues is long মানে if you think of writing it down no tetale bahut digol kine iman likhi poribo na lage and oh yes yeah just hedu last thought so if you are talking about agencies for cross pollination agencies could be broadly divided into two types biotic agencies and abiotic agencies so it will likha এইবিলাক বস্তুটো already we know and biotic agencies will have to read about certain points right so one by one we have to discuss question kiya hai what is anemophily or pollination by wind what happened etu mane chale ekho nai etu nije likha etu kom paba thik ase baki kini to we'll just keep on writing notes what are the points you need to remember first point important all the points are important फास्ट लिखा. Okay, so we are talking about agencies of cross-pollination. If you are talking about the first abiotic agency, it is air or wind. What is the question that is asked? First, so jikini points moi tick kori disu, those are the points that you will study, right? Question kiya hai? Pollination by wind is called as, or anemophily is pollination by wind, water, insects, bats, snake, etc. etc. So, anemophily is pollination by wind or air. So, what to jani bolibo? Next is, if a certain plant has or needs to get pollinated due to water or due to air, it should have certain characteristics, right? Whenever we talk about pollination, now the most common pollination, this could be one type of pollination, insect pollination is also another common thing, right? In certain cases, a flower develops a particular scent, smell thake no, so that the insects get attracted. In certain cases, that smell is not essential. So, you have to read it from that point of view. Plant jodi water pollinated hobo lage, characteristics ki thakibo. If it has to get pollinated by air, what should it possess, or ki characteristics thakibo laibo? What about the flower? What type of stamen it should have? What type of stigma it should have, etc. etc. So, question could also be asked like this: a flower with feathery stigma, gets easily pollinated by. So, feathery stigma car under it, obviously air, so you have to remember that. Next, we have talked about something called as pollen kit, if you remember in our morphology class, right? Hibiscus or pollen kit asile, hibiscus or pollen kit, what is the function of that pollen kit? Obviously helps in pollination. What is pollen kit? Nothing but the pollen grains that is sticky that will get attached to insect body. Right. So, pollen kit thaka ketia necessary when that pollination is conducted by insects. If you are talking about pollination by air, pollen kit lagibo janu? Buji paisa na question to? Pollen kit or kam ki? The pollen kit is something that is yellow, something that is sticky, that pollen grains attach itself to the body of the insects so that it can carry those pollen grains to other flowers. Right. So, his sticky nature to ketia dorkar, jetia insect pollinated hobo. Air pollinate hobo lagile, sticky lagibo niki? Nalake. So, what I have written? Non-sticky. Right. So, question could be asked, presence of pollen kit is a characteristic of dash pollinated flowers, insect pollinated flowers. Right. In case of this, very important, versatile stamen. We have discussed about versatile stamen. Types of stamen we have talked about, right? Depending on the particular type of attachment that they show, no? When we talk about the stamen, there are three parts, that is anther and the filament, and we have the joining link that is called as the connective, right? So, connective to coat lagi thake. Is it at the base of the anther? Is it at the dorsal part of the anther? So, accordingly, we have different types of filament, and one type of a stamen was called as versatile stamen. Question किया है characteristic of our anemophilous flower, options থাকিব, option not की देखिब versatile stamen or just the vice versa. Presence of versatile stamen is a characteristic of dash pollinated plant, right? And some of the points are from the GK point of view. Obviously, if it has to float in air, it has to be small, it has to be light, etc. etc. We have written something called a single ovule because jiman ovule থাকিব himan heavy হৈ যাব flower to. Right. So, certain points from GK point of view, certain points that you have to put a stress on. Versatile stamen, very important, very common in grass, this is also important, this one important, and non-sticky nature and feathery stigma. Yeah, jigita point disu no, out of all the section that you have to study, egita point pohile it's more than enough. Yatke besi aru pohibo nalage, and the questions always revolve around these only. Yatke besi aru ekui no pohiba. Because if you go on consulting different books, you have various huge content about one paragraph. Na eta point or eta unit or bahut information ase, no point. Ekhinike পঢ়িবা ইয়াতে পঢ়ি পেলাই যোনকিটা পইণ্ট মই টিক কৰি দিছো হেগিটাই পঢ়িবা, that's all. আৰু once you start doing your MCQs, you will have an idea যে ইয়াৰ পৰা questions কেনেকুৱা আহিছে. Clear? So, whenever you hear about anemophily, what do you remember? Anemophily, grass, versatile stamen, feathery stigma, non-sticky. You don't have to write in sentence. অকমান সেই word কেইটা জানিলে হৈ গ'ল. Clear? So, these were the points about anemophily. If it's over, tell a hydrophily likha. That's number 2. Hydrophily or pollination by water. Any hole niki? Right. So, what is hydrophily? Pollination by water is called as hydrophily. One common mistake that we do. Okay, if I ask you a question, in which type of a plant can you see hydrophily? Yeah, Velisaria. Yeah, one example could be Velisaria, one could be Juicera, etc., etc. But generally, what people say is, manhue ki koi je hydrophytes undergo hydrophily. Hydrophytes undergo hydrophily, but you have to remember all hydrophytes do not undergo hydrophily. Hydrophily means ki pollination by water. Pollination by water kar hobo, water plants ore hobo, right? But all hydrophytes do not get pollinated by water. It grows in water, but pollination by insects hobo pare. It grows in water, pollination by air hobo pare. Not necessarily je pani hoise karone pani re tomar pollination hobo. If you are talking about water pollination, one most common example is coconut, and coconut obviously is not a hydrophyte. Understood? So that is one line that you will remember. Okay, I will hit him. Right. So ultimately what we can prove, all hydrophytes are not hydrophilus. Water hyacinth best example of a hydrophyte, kintu hydrophilus niki nohoy, thik ase. So ekhan likhi loa chart kon. Entomophily, pollination by insects. Koram moi etia olopisot koram. Biotic agencies jetia korim, then we will be discussing. Okay, now the characteristics of hydrophilus plants. সেইটোৱে হয়। এটা ইনসেক্ট এটা উইন্ড So hydrophily বা hydrophytes দুটা প্ল্যান্টে বেছিকে পঢ়িব লাগে এটা হল জুষ্টেৰা এটা হল ভেলিসনেৰিয়া right So the flowers that undergo hydrophily need not be colorful to hobo karone colorful kiyo hoy attraction o karone so it is what birds pollinated insect pollinated second as far as the production of nectar is concerned nectar kiyo lage insect ok attract koribole right nectar mane ki that sweet substance that the insect have it as food that is called as nectar no nectar to hydrophily dokar nai কারণ পানীৰেই তো যাব নেক্টাৰ কিয় লাগে সো হেতু কোৱেশ্চন আহে ইজ প্ৰেজেন্স অফ নেক্টাৰ ইজ আ ক্যাৰেক্টাৰিষ্টিক অফ ড্যাশ পলিনেটেড প্লান্ট right বা হাইড্ৰোফিলি নেক্টাৰ লাগে নে নালাগে right that's the way you will study okay talking about hydrophily two types epihydrophily and hypohydrophily if you remember hydrophytes we have talked about in our morphology class we have talked about different types of hydrophytes like jeneke free floating hydrophyte a totally submerged hydrophyte right rooted free floating rooted submerged hydrophyte right rooted floating hydrophyte different types so pani thua plants bilak sob je pani surface ote hobo not necessary no kisuman to pani tolotu hoy kisuman to enuka hoy je roots remain below the water and the leaves remain above the water right and if you are using the word free floating then obviously the roots will not reach below the water surface ote thakibo so depending on different types of hydrophytes we have different type of pollination right so in this section according I mean as far as your course material is concerned it's only about two of them you will study one is Jewstera and the other is Velisneria question kiya hai from the first point the question starts epihydrophily is seen in but Velisneria undergoes that Hydrophilus kenuka dhoroner hydrophily epihydrophily epi bili koa loge obviously on the surface of the water if you are talking about Jewstera hypo tamane tolor pollination hobo right so the next thing is we will be writing certain points about Velisneria and Jewstera heading koriba Velisneria এটো হৈছে Velisneria jungita point aniso eta poribo lagibo first question ahe monoecious ne dioecious it's a dioecious plant Ceratophyllum, another hydrophyte. প্ৰথমে লিখি লোৱা কি পঢ়িব লাগিব চাম Hold. So, it is important key. Vallisneria is an example of key hydrophyte. What type of a hydrophyte? Hydrophyte, as I said, no, both beleg type of hydrophyte thake. What type of hydrophyte? Submerged hydrophyte. Pollination kot hoy. Ba, yeah, we had a word called as epihydrophily, no? Epihydrophily hobo lagile, pollination kot hobo lagile, surface of the water, kintu plant dal ki? Submerged. Understood? There is a difference. The plant is submerged, but the pollination occurs at the surface of the water. Right? First, it is what monot rakha. Next, monoecious ne dioecious. Dioecious. What is dioecious? Sexes are separate, plant are separate. You have two plants, one is a male plant, one is a female plant. Right? Next, female flowers have long coiled pedicel. What is a pedicel? A stalk of a flower is called as a pedicel, right? So, pedicellor question kene kya hai a plant that possess long coiled pedicel would undergo pollination by means of hydrophily. But one characteristic of a hydrophilous plant, they will have a long coiled pedicel, right? Next, male flowers, not very important. I will show you the diagram. So, egita point mon rakhiba dioecious question ahise submerged hydrophyte ahibo, pollination code hobo, example of epihydrophily. As far as the diagram is concerned, so we are talking about water, right? Water at Vallisneria grow koribo, since we just a rough diagram, okay? Akibo sakibo nalage eku dokar nai. Okay. So, we have Vallisneria ki hoy dioecious. So, we have a male plant and a female plant. Panir kot ase, etu jodi surface hoy submerged ase. So, you have the male plant having the male flowers, you have the female plant having the female flowers. Female flowers or male flowers ki hoy, once the male flowers get matured, these flowers tolor pura ki ahibo yate upongi thakibo. They will start floating on the surface of the water. Right? Male flowers are light weighted, small and float at the surface of the water. Ketia float koribo, jetia tahat matured hobo. Initially float kori nathake. They will first form, and after they get matured, all the male flowers will accumulate, or they will arrange themselves on the surface, right? If the male flowers on the surface, tetiale female flower to surface ote thakibo laibo na, that's jatniki pollination hoy. At the beginning, female flower eidal, what is this? Pedicel. This is the female flower because we have the stigma here, right? So, this is the pedicel, thiki hoi thake, yate thake, coiled hoi thake. Jetia immature hoy, etu uncoil kori pelai. At the surface of the water, you have the male flowers and the female flowers, and the pollination will occur, and then they will come below. Buji paisa? Edal ki hoi ase, etia uncoil hoi ase, right? Normally ki hoi thake, coiled hoi thake, right? Uncoil ketia hobo, jetia male flowers are ready, you know. Ene to uncoil hoi pelai kam nai. So, the male flower and the female flower gets ready or gets matured at the same time, right? Next, this will get uncoiled, the male flowers will be there, and ultimately this and this ki hobo, pollination hobo, and ultimately the zygote and the embryo and etc. Coat form koribo on the surface of the water, then below the water. Obviously below the water because the plant has to grow below the water itself. Jedi yat hole hoten teto free floating hoi gol hoy. বুঝি পাইছে? It's only the pollination part that occurs at the surface of the water, and so we are using the word called as epihydrophily. Clear? That's all. Next likha Juicera. So যোনকেইটা word tick কৰিছে পঢ়িবা দেই, dioecious, long coiled pedicel, male flowers float on the surface, etc. etc. Okay, Vallisneria marine ne freshwater. Please underline that word also. Because two examples we are going to study, one is marine, one is freshwater. Juicera is marine, right? Just two lines about Juicera. First, Juicera is an example of hydrophyte. What type of a hydrophyte? Submerged hydrophyte. Freshwater ne marine, marine. Where does pollination occur in case of Juicera? Pollination occurs below the water in case of Juicera. In case of Vallisneria, where does pollination occur? It occurs on the surface of the water. So Juicera, hypohydrophily. Vallisneria, epihydrophily. क्यों नॉरे? ফিমেল মেল দুইটাটো ওচৰতে আছে ন, তাতে পানীতে থকা জীৱ, তে ওপৰলৈ কেনেকৈ লৈ আনিবা হয়নে? চ' পানীয়ে তাহাঁতক ওচৰত আনি পেলাই পলিনেশ্যন কৰিব। অল দ্যাটছ ইম্পৰ্টেণ্ট ইজ দ্য এণ্ট্ৰি অফ দ্য মেল গ্যামেট ইনটু দ্য ফিমেল। এণ্ট্ৰিটোহে ইম্পৰ্টেণ্ট। চ' এণ্ট্ৰিটো পানীয়েতো এণ্টাৰ কৰিয়ে দিলে, ৰাইট? বাহিৰত যেনেকৈ বতাহে কৰে কামটো, ইয়াতে কি কৰিছে? পানীয়ে কামটো কৰিছে, একেটাই কথা। The new student, are you understanding? Sexual reproduction hoise na schoolot? Hoise? Completed? Vallisneria, Juicera janu? Remove your mask. Exam ki hoise? Taketo? Clear hoise na term 1? Clear hoise? So here we taught what is the point that is important? Again, ribbon-like pollen grains. Ribbon-like pollen grain is a characteristic of kenuka plants, Hydrophilus plants, right? Hydrophilus buli kole pollinated by water ami jano. So we have read certain words: long coiled pedicel. Second, ribbon-like pollen grain. Third, versatile stamens in the first one, right? Those are the words that you will give interest. Feathery stigma, winged pollen grain. Right? So, এইবিলাক words har ওপৰতহে question আহিব, এনেকৈ সেন্টেন্সৰ ওপৰতো question কেতিয়াও নাহে। Understood না? Okay. Next we have to discuss the biotic agencies. Biotic অলপ পিছত কৰিম আৰু এটা কৰি লওঁ অলপ আগতে আৰু এটা পইণ্ট মাৰ্ক কৰিব লাগিব you all have written a word called a sentence saying pollen grains are produced in huge amount অলপ আগতে লিখিছিলা huge amount কেতিয়া produce কৰিব small amount কেতিয়া produce কৰিব huge amount কেতিয়া produce কৰিব যেতিয়া maximum goes waste yes or no during the process of pollination if maximum of the pollen grains goes waste in the sense does not reach the correct destination then obviously pollen grains amount kiman hobo laibo besi hobo laibo right and if ekdom pura you don't have to go to a particular bahut jagah duror jagah le jabo na lage and you have a particular agent like an insect who will properly do its work as far as pollination by insect and pollination by water is concerned specific and more precisely kune koribo obviously insects e koribo so in that case small amount or produce korileo hobo right huge amount of could produce koribo lage hydrophytes in case of hydrophilus not hydrophytes hydrophilic ki hobo lage huge amount of produce koribo lage right in case of air also it should be produced in huge amount only in case of insect pollinated common amount of produce korile because they have the sticky nature and they will stick to the body of the insect right chief pollinator ki hoy honeybee What is the most common type of pollination that you see in case of plants? New student, ki naam tumhar? Artery. Okay. The question is, which is the most I'm asking you, which is the most common type of pollination? Pollination part to sexual reproduction as a term one rahisile. So which is the most common type of pollination that you see in case of plants? Jana ne nazana? Ne pahori gosa? Ne hunai nai? So many options, no? Porisla. This one. 80% में की साया ऐसा क्लास आउट? Okay, doesn't matter. Okuman, if you see that while I am writing the notes, if there are certain points that you did not get it, maybe in the NCERT book, likhi loba. Current MCQ from entrance point of view, very important. Okay. Insect pollination hobo lagile, what is the characteristic that you should see in case of a flower? The flower needs to be very brightly colored, produce nectar, etc., etc. Or maybe it has a sticky character or pollen kit thakibo. Rafflesia hunisa. Rafflesia are not the largest flower, no? Right. So, these 2 points are slightly extra just to understand that according to the different colors we have different insect pollinator, according to a different odor we have different insect pollinator. Iman basi from examination point of view not important, kintu rotting milk ba rotting milk or okoman ketieba, right? Car thake, it's Rafflesia. Okay. So, what we have understood is if you are talking about insect pollination, then one of the most important characteristics that the flower should have is it should be very colorful, no? Colorful hobo laibo, that's one of the basic needs. Sometimes what happens, there are certain conditions in which the flower is not colorful, but the other part of a plant is colorful. Remember the example of bract being colorful, ami morphology korisilo. What is a bract? Bract ki hoy? It's a leaf, right, that has a flower at the apex, that is axil, that is called as a bract, right. Bract to colorful, flower to colorful no hoy. The best example is bougainvillea, that paper flower that we see, no? Okay. Next point. Extra kini hol kol nahi? Not like leaves colorful example dibo paribane? Leaves colorful. Have you seen a plant whose leaves, the leaves are either pinkish or reddish in color, and the plant itself is called as ki lal patta in Hindi, Euphorbia, Euphorbia pulcherrima. 2. AENDA. Right. So this is a part from the morphology section. So here from morphology point of view question ahibo pare. Example of a plant whose bracts are colorful. Example of a plant where the leaves are colorful. Example of a plant where the sepal is colorful. Generally when we talk about leaves and sepals, they are always green in color. We have talked about certain words called as petaloid and sepaloid. Right, morphology porisilu. So from that portion this is related. So we study here, we study there also, right. So in case of insect pollination or insect pollinated plants, the flower needs to be colorful, but in spite of the fact that there are certain flowers where they are not colorful, in that case ki hobo je beleg part bilak colorful hobo and they will attract the insects. No, that is a brown spot. That is not colorful. That is a type, maybe it's a type of a disease called as necrosis. Malnutrition. Huh? Mane gute patbila koru pray brown. Thakibo pare species beleg. Normally juntu ami dekha pao hetu to green color. If suppose the plant has developed a disease called as necrosis, that ki hobo brown spots hobo. Those are called as dead spots. In species thakibo pare no beleg. Okay. So if you are talking about insect pollinated insects bilak kihor karone ahibo to the flower, not for pollination but for food, right. So they will come for nectar and so they get rewarded, and so etu. Next, edible pollen, there are certain pollens that we can eat. Next, the tallest flower, right, it is so it has a tube like structure, mane enuka type 6 feet. So ei gute jega khinit ki hoy insects they can lay the egg. Okay, talking about pollination, which one is the most common type of pollination? Obviously insect pollination is the most common, so we have to write many things and we have to know many things about insect pollination. Etia ki ase se some special cases of entomophily examples bilak di ase. If you remember, if you have heard certain words called yucca and pronuba insect, shunisa niki, right? Ba eta words pseudo pollination, right? So he bilak bostu yar logot related. Tomalke heading kora special cases of entomophily. So question ahe yucca plant of pollinate kune kore. So ketaman specific examples ami janibo lagibo, right? If you talk about yucca, you have to talk about pronuba insects, right? Pronuba insect e kak pollinate kore yucca plant of. So not necessary you need to remember this word, but etu lagibo. Pronuba yucca. As far as the process of pollination is concerned, keneke hoy, you don't have to study. Insect pollinated, no? So the insect will enter inside the flower. What does this insect do? It enters the ovary, punctures the ovary and lays its eggs there. Insect to plant dalor ovary to puncture kori pele tat humai tat koni pare. In the process, what happened? The insect could be carrying the pollen grains beforehand itself. So it enters the ovary and it reaches what? Ovary humale to it's easy. No? Pollen grain to ultimately coat thoidile ovary humai dile. Right? That's the way they will go for pollination. Process na lage. Okay, next question ahead. Lever mechanism or turnpipe mechanism is seen in. It is seen in salvia, or pollination, but turnpipe mechanism type of pollination is a characteristic of. Or salvia undergoes pollination by. Right, because we have several examples that we have to study. So salvia porhile lever, the way of pollinating, no, tahator jinto process or he process to kami ki boli ko lever mechanism but turnpipe. So lever mechanism but turnpipe mechanism type of pollination ami ko dekha pao in case of yucca. This is only the line that you have to study. As far as yucca, as far as salvia is concerned, salvia points are bahut diya ase, but you don't need to remember. It is a bilobed flower, right? Yate tumar ki thakibo. Male flower thakibo, yate female flowers thakibo, right? When the insects come and fall here, it gives a pressure. So this will bend down towards the female plant and ultimately the pollen grains will get dusted, right? So iman khini nalage. Understood? Mechanism etaru nalage, khali ki monot rakhiba, lever mechanism or turnpipe mechanism in case of salvia. In case of this, you have to remember the pollinator. Yate pollinator nalage. No, self pollination. Insect to ahibo. ইনসেক্টটো তলৰ পৰা ওপৰলৈ ওপৰৰ পৰা তললৈ আহিব তললৈ আহি পেলাই ফিমেলটো ফ্লাৱাৰটোৰ ভিতৰত সোমাই যাব পলিনেশ্যন কৰিব অলপ আগতে কি পালো লিভাৰ পাইপ মেকানিজম এতিয়া কি পাইছো ট্ৰ্যাপ ডোৰ মেকানিজম ৰাইট সো अगेन as I have said here no you don't have to learn about the process ফাইকাছৰ কেনেকুৱা ধৰণৰ পলিনেশ্যন দেখা পাও ট্ৰ্যাপ ডোৰ মেকানিজম ৰিমেম্বৰ ফাইকাছ we have taken it as an example of a special type of inflorescence ফাইকাছৰ কেনেকুৱা ধৰণৰ ইনফ্লোৰেসেন্স থাকে ফাইকাছৰ ইনফ্লোৰেসেন্স Trapdoor mechanism mane trap mane ki you trap the insects right remember we have drawn something like this hair male flower female flower gallflowers hypenthodium inflorescence right so ficus boli kole hypenthodium very important what's the type of inflorescence that you see it's hypenthodium hetu word janibo lagibo next in this case the process of pollination is called as trapdoor question I had trapdoor mechanism is a characteristic of dash it's a characteristic of ficus and ficus could be anything ficus bengalensis hobo pare ficus carica hobo pare ficus religiosa hobo pare right any ficus and next this is also important কিছুমানত pollinator লাগিব কিছুমানত pollinator নালাগে in this case you have to talk about the pollinator in this case also you have to know about the pollinator clear in case of a particular orchid not all orchids in case of a particular orchid that is ophrys get pollinated by a particular insect that is called as colpa what type of a insect it's a wasp ঠিক আছে wasp word to monitor কারণ insects could be beetles also insect could be wasp also insect could be butterflies also right so ophrys get pollinated by colpa so what is the relation ophrys colpa jeneke yucca ki asile pronuba right so mismatch ahibo pare so you have to know the pollinator right so yucca pronuba in case of ophrys it's colpa what is ophrys orchid and their mechanism is called as pseudocopulation so the question might be pseudocopulation is seen in case of orchid or option not ki thakibo ophrys right but ophrys colpa relation is an example of pseudocopulation right? What is pseudocopulation? False copulation or false mating, that is what is called as pseudocopulation. Why do we call it as a false mating? Because the flower looks like the female of the insect. There is a male insect, the male insect comes to mate with the female insect, female insect to nisina ekdom dekhat kuntu orchid tu. So, the male confuses himself and thinks the flower to be the female partner and tries to copulate, and so that is what is called as pseudocopulation, right. In the process ki hoy pollination, exactly, उसमें तो सबसे important ही था वो, all the relationships, ना, at that time also you have to study this, it's the same thing, right. So, question from that chapter or it can come from this chapter also. So, lever mechanism palu, trapdoor mechanism palu, pseudocopulation palu. So, insect pollination, this is the thing that you have to study. So, insect pollination, the note is long because this is the most common type of pollination. What you need to remember, the chief pollinator. Second is what is the characteristics for a plant to undergo insect pollination, all those beautiful color and all those nectar, etc. The process of insect pollination is called as entomophily ne anemophily, because we have a tendency je anemophily boli kole amar insect animal lage. No, it's not that, right? So, oh no, anemophily kole eneka na lage, it's like animal, it's not that, it's entomophily for insect, anemophily for air, right? Next, most common type we have understood, certain examples, right? And maximum question has been asked about this special cases. So, special case kita hai hami podhim. What is the type of mechanism that is seen? Who is the plant? I mean, what's the name of the plant and who is the pollinator, right? After this, we come back to the different types of pollination. Etu ki asale insect pollination, no? Next number is pollination by birds. Kiman number hobo? Number 4 niki. Pollination by bird is called as class 12, say. A matro porikha diye ase, a matro nohoy dudin maner agote. Ki boli koy? Class 12. You, pollination by birds is called as. Ase na NCERT ase to word 2. Very good. Very good. It's ornithophily. Okay. From this section, duta point, eta hol, the name of the process, pollination by bird is called as. Term to janibo libo, second example. Maximum question has been asked about the example. Question I have, bombyx undergoes pollination by, or ornithophily is seen in. Kataman example di dibo, you have to identify the example. It's only two examples that you remember, bombyx and callistemon. Bottle brush plant, dekhisa? Bottle brush. Planted, the flowers look like a brush. You have a huge tree. What is it na? Commerce bus stop. Exactly at a gate, no? Gate or the goss as a saba. Flowers kene hulomi ahe. Just look like a brush. A pink color. Because ako ene kahibo ene. Ekdom bus standard ase. Jeta fula homoy hobo no, just notice. Okay, anyway. So the two terms, one example, this is important. And the word ornithophily. Next we come to number 5, pollination by bats. Kodam full dekhisa? Round, round, yellow, yellow. Yare examples kine important. Birds pollination or example very important. Two examples out of that bombyx, the most commonly asked question, right? And here what is important? The term. Term is important. Term to basic question has been asked about examples, right? If you go to the MCQ books, yare eta question pabai. It's always this word, Caesalia. Most frequently asked question is about Caesalia. Next, এই দুটা word জানিব লাগিব instead of Caesalia sausage tree বুলিও দিব right instead of Adansonia baobab tree বুলিও দিব right common name right so এই তিনটা example তার ভিতৰতে অকল number 2 and number 3 both the common name and the scientific name এই দুটাৰ ওপৰতে question আহে whenever you see these two example একদম চকু মুদি bat লিখি দিবা bator দুটা example এ পঢ়িম right jeneke birds or ami bombyx basically poru teneke and the last one last second not important Again, term important, melecophily. Example important. তাৰ ভিতৰত এই লিলি এৰম লিলি এটো ওপৰত আহিবা তাৰ ওপৰতে কোৱেশ্চন আহে the last one Last one is pollination by snakes. We have certain plants where the pollination occurs by snakes. Kunbilak plants, the plants that have flowers with very strong smell, right? So, Michaelia. Next we have Santalum. Santalum flowers or called smell no, it's the entire plant, no? Sandalwood, right? Hydrophilic. In this case, instead of reading this, no, just read one example. Lemna ke bare mein kabhi questions nahi aaya, so it's better you just strike it off only. Arum lily is important.
Pollination by human.
Pollination by human. Human e pollination no code kore. Flower to ni pare tat logai dim neki. I take a rose and I put it there neki. Special cases thakiba, but I don't know the term used for that. Okay. Hol aru bahut hoise no? Hogol bahut hoise. Pollination part of a question ahe kintu. Thik ase pollination of jikita point mark korisu no? Eblak tumi MCQ korile gom paba. Right? So it's the marked only the marked words you will study, not the entire note. Right? Examples important and the characteristics of pollination. So I think that's all for today. So we have done about pollination. What we have studied is we have talked about the male sex organ, we have talked about the female reproductive part, not sex organ, male reproductive part, female reproductive part. Both of them are ready. They got pollinated. What next? Pollination of ki hobo? Fertilization. But before fertilization, you have to talk something called as pollen pistil interaction. Pollen to go play code purva pistilot tat kiba kibi to hobo lagibo. So those interactions we are going to study in the next class. Okay, thank you.